The Dralethian armada burned through the void like a storm of molten steel, their angular warships cutting through the darkness with the precision of industrial blades. Each vessel pulsed with the deep, rhythmic glow of their forge. Core reactors, casting long shadows across the hulls of their neighbors. The fleet was vast, hundreds of ships, each a fortress of segmented armor and brutalist design, their weapons primed and hungry. At the heart of this war machine, High Commander Draltal stood upon the command deck of the Sovereign Pyre, his armored fingers flexing against the obsidian, black railing. His copper, veined eyes flickered with the reflection of the tactical displays. Each screen, a mosaic of threat assessments and projected outcomes. The humans had been given their ultimatum. They had refused, and now they would burn. Final approach, intoned one of his subcommanders, the words vibrating through the metallic hum of the bridge. No sign of resistance. Their orbital defenses are silent. Draltal exhaled, the sound a hiss of steam through his filtration vents. Expected. The humans had always been reckless. But they were not fools. They knew what awaited them. Then the scanners pulsed. A single contact. Not a fleet. Not even a battle group. It hung in the void before them, a sleek, asymmetrical silhouette against the distant starlight. No massive cannons, no bristling missile arrays. Just smooth, dark plating and a single, unblinking running light. Draltal's mandibles twitched in irritation. A mistake. A malfunctioning transponder. "Identify it," he commanded. The tactical officer hesitated. "Signature confirms. Human design. Designation. Solstice's receipt." A ripple of confusion passed through the bridge. Draltal's claws dug into the railing. "A courier vessel?" The officer shook his head. "No, Commander, it is. It is a warship, or at least it was. Scans indicate heavy modifications, unknown configuration." Draltal's gaze narrowed. The humans had always been unpredictable. But this was absurd. One ship against the might of the Dralethian armada. "Open fire," he ordered. "Reduce it to slag." The Sovereign Pyre's plasma lances flared to life, their orange-red coils charging with the fury of a dying star. The first volley streaked across the void, a storm of molten death meant to erase the insolent speck before them. Then the impossible happened. The human ship moved, not with the sluggish turn of conventional thrusters, but with a sudden impossible lurch, as if space itself had bent around it. The plasma lances passed through empty vacuum, dissipating harmlessly into the dark. Silence gripped the bridge. Draltal's blood ran cold. On the view screen, the Solstice's receipt rotated slowly, almost lazily, its running light flickering once. Then the transmission came through, a human voice, calm, almost amused. "You missed." And in that moment, Draltal realized something terrible. This was not a desperate last stand. This was a receipt, and humanity had come to collect. The silence on the Sovereign Pyre's bridge was thick enough to choke on. Draltal's claws flexed against the armrests of his command throne, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary eyes, narrow, heat, sensitive slits along his brow, flickered as they adjusted, scanning the tactical displays again and again. The data refused to change. The human ship had dodged, not by evasion, not by speed, by disappearing. One moment, the plasma lances had been a heartbeat from impact, their molten fury painting the void in searing orange. The next, nothing. The Solstice's receipt had simply stepped aside, as though the universe itself had bent to its will. Vashdor, the chief scientist, was already hunched over his console, his copper-plated fingers dancing across the interface. His cranial vents, normally pulsing with the steady rhythm of Dralethian composure, flared wide, betraying his agitation. "Impossible," he hissed, the words laced with static from his vocal modulator. "No species has inertial negation at that scale. Not even the old ones could." Draltal cut him off with a snarl. "Then explain it." The bridge shuddered as secondary batteries cycled up, their targeting arrays locking onto the human vessel once more. The Solstice's receipt hadn't moved. It hung there, silhouetted against the distant glow of the nebula, its running lights blinking in a slow, mocking rhythm, like it was waiting. Draltal's mandibles twitched. This was wrong. Humans were supposed to be reckless, desperate. They fought like cornered beasts, throwing themselves into battle with crude kinetics and brute force tactics. This was precision. This was calculation. A new transmission crackled across the comms. The human voice, Major Victoria Harriman, if the intercepted fleet logs were correct, was still infuriatingly calm. Dralethian command vessel Sovereign Pyre. This is your second warning. Cease hostilities, or we will respond in kind. Vashdor's spines rattled. They're bluffing. A single ship against the entire armada. Even if they have some new drive system, they can't. The Solstice's receipt pulsed. A single brilliant flare of blue light rippled across its hull, and for the briefest instant, the void around it warped. The stars bent, space itself twisted like molten alloy under a forge's kiss. Then the ship was gone, not vanished, relocated. It reappeared 3 kilometers off the Pyre's starboard flank, close enough that Draltal could see the scorch marks on its hull from past battles. The human vessel's weapons ports hummed to life, their apertures glowing a cold, predatory blue. Targeting lasers painted the Pyre's shields. Vashdor's console shrieked in alarm. Dive locked onto our primary reactor. There, he froze. By the forge, they're counting down. Draltal's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a battle. This was a demonstration, and humanity was keeping receipts. The Dralethian armada had been built for war. Every angular hull, every segmented armor plate, every molten core thrumming with orange, red fury had been forged in the fires of conquest. Their ships were fortresses, their weapons designed to reduce worlds to slag. A single human vessel, battered, scorched, its hull patched with welds that spoke of hasty repairs, had just teleported. Not through some crude jump drive, not with the telltale shudder of displaced mass. It had folded space. Draltal's claws dug into the command throne's armrests. His secondary heart pounded, flooding his veins with cold adrenaline. This wasn't possible. The Dralethian Empire had spent centuries perfecting their warp conduits, their engineers laboring over equations that bent reality just enough to slip between stars. And yet this human ship, this Solstice's receipt, had done it effortlessly. Vashdor's voice was a whisper. Their energy signature, it's not a drive, it's a weapon. Draltal didn't need the scientist's confirmation. He could see it in the way the human vessel hung in the void. Its targeting arrays locked onto the Pyre's reactor core. The blue glow of its weapons wasn't just light, it was calculation. A cold, precise promise: we could have hit you. We chose not to. The human commander's voice crackled over the comms, calm as a surgeon's scalpel. This is Major Victoria Harriman of the United Earth Vanguard. You have trespassed in sovereign human space. You have fired upon civilian outposts. You have ignored every warning. A pause. The silence stretched like a blade being drawn. This is your last chance to stand down. Draltal's spines flared. The arrogance of it, the sheer audacity, burned like molten metal in his chest. A single ship daring to dictate terms to an armada. He opened his maw to order the fleet to fire. Then the receipt's hull shimmered again. Not a full jump this time, just a flicker, a ripple in reality. And suddenly, the ship was everywhere. 5 copies of it, 10, 20, each identical, each with weapons hot. Vashdor's console erupted in panicked alerts. They're not holograms. Mass readings confirm. Draltal's. Blood turned to ice. Quantum superposition. The humans hadn't just mastered teleportation. They had weaponized uncertainty itself. Every one of those ships was real. Every one of them could fire. And the Dralethians had no way of knowing which one would. The receipt's voice came again, softer now, almost pitying. You should have read the fine print. Then space screamed. The human vessels, fired. Not at the pyre, not at the armada, at the void itself. Beams of blue energy lanced out, intersecting in a perfect geometric lattice, a cage of light. And where they met, reality unraveled, stars twisted, space fractured. The Dralethian fleet sensors went blind, their targeting systems screaming in static. For the first time in his life, Draltal felt true fear, not of death, of irrelevance. The humans hadn't just matched Dralethian technology, they had surpassed it, and they had done so with a single ship. The receipt's final transmission was a single word, delivered with the weight of a closing ledger receded. Then the cage of light collapsed, and the human vessel was gone, leaving only silence and the terrible, unshakable knowledge that the Dralethians had just been outplayed. Section Fe. Terms and conditions. The silence that followed was worse than any explosion. Draltal's command throne, forged from blackened Dralethian steel, its edges still glowing faintly with residual heat from the ship's plasma conduits, felt suddenly cold beneath him. His claws flexed against the armrests, the sound of metal groaning under pressure lost in the vast hollow quiet of the bridge. Sensors flickered back online in stuttering bursts, painting fragmented images across the tactical displays. The human ship. No, ships, though the distinction hardly mattered now, was gone. Vanished, not destroyed, not fleeing, and in its wake, the void bore scars. Where the blue lattice had burned, space itself still shimmered with afterimages, like the ghost of a wound. Stars warped at the edges, their light bending unnaturally, as if caught in some unseen current. The Dralethian armada, once a flawless formation of angular, fortress-like warships, now drifted in disarray. Their molten, orange engine cores pulsed erratically, their targeting arrays still cycling through corrupted data. Vashdor, the fleet's chief scientist, stood frozen at his station, his copper-plated cranial ridges twitching in a way that betrayed something beyond shock. Draltal had seen that expression only once before, on the face of a Dralethian who had stared too long into the heart of a dying star. "High Commander," Vashdor said at last, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. "The energy signatures, they were not weapons." Draltal's secondary eyelids flicked sideways, a reflexive response to danger. "Explain," Vashdor hesitated. His claws tapped at the console, summoning holographic readouts that twisted and fractured before stabilizing. They were protocols. The word landed like a hammer. Protocols, not attacks, not defenses. The humans had not fired upon the Dralethians. They had not needed to. They had simply demonstrated, with clinical surgical precision, that every assumption the Dralethians had made about them was wrong. Their technology was not crude, their tactics were not reckless, their restraint was not weakness, it was a choice. And now, the Dralethians stood in the aftermath, their fleet unharmed but their dominance shattered. The receipt had not even deemed them worthy of destruction, it had merely corrected them. Draltal's mandibles tightened. His entire life, every battle, every conquest, had been built upon the unshakable belief that strength was measured in firepower, in the ability to reduce enemies to molten slag. But the humans had redefined strength before his very eyes, and worse, they had let him live to understand it. A low chime echoed through the bridge. The comms officer stiffened, his spines flaring in alarm. "High Commander, incoming transmission." Draltal did not move. "Origin," the officer swallowed. "Unknown. But it's addressed to you." The holographic display flickered to life, and there she was, Major Victoria Harriman. Her image was crisp, her uniform immaculate, her expression unreadable. She stood against a backdrop of sleek, human-designed consoles, their surfaces smooth where Dralethian tech was jagged, efficient where Dralethian engineering was brute force. "Commander Draltal," she said, no title, no honorific, Just his name, a statement, not a courtesy. Her eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto his. "You have seen our receipt." It was not a question. Draltal's claws dug deeper into the throne. Harriman continued, her voice devoid of malice. "You will return to your High Council. You will tell them what you witnessed, and you will deliver a message." She leaned forward, ever so slightly. "Next time, read the fine print." The transmission cut. The bridge was silent once more. Draltal exhaled, the air hissing through his vents. Around him, his crew waited, their postures tense, their eyes flickering between him and the empty space where the human's image had been. They expected rage, demands for vengeance. Instead, Draltal rose from his throne and turned toward the viewing portal. Beyond it, the stars burned, unchanged, uncaring. And for the first time in his life, the High Commander of the Dralethian armada felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He had come to teach humanity its place. Instead, they had taught him his. The silence on the Dralethian flagship Molten Vengeance was thick enough to choke on. Draltal remained motionless before the viewing portal, his armored plates shifting minutely as cooling vents hissed along his spine. The human vessel, just one ship, still hung in the void before them, its sleek, angular silhouette, a stark contrast to the brutalist, segmented monstrosities of the Dralethian armada. It shouldn't have been a threat. It shouldn't have survived. Behind him, Vashdor's claws tapped against his data slate, the sound brittle in the heavy air. The scientist's inner eyelids flicked rapidly, his thermal vision still cycling through the aftermath of the engagement. The readings made no sense. The human ship had no right to be intact, let alone victorious. Draltal's mandibles tightened. He had expected fire. He had expected defiance. He had not expected receipts. The human commander, Harriman, had transmitted more than just her message. She had sent records, data streams, proof. Every skirmish, every ambush, every accidental border incursion the Dralethians had dismissed as deniable operations. All of it, meticulously logged, cross-referenced, and now flung back at them with the cold precision of a scalpel. Vashdor finally broke the silence. "High Commander, the calculations." Draltal's voice was a low grind of molten stone. The human ship hadn't just fought. It had accounted. Every shot fired, every maneuver executed, every drop of fuel spent, all measured, all optimized, all leveraged with terrifying efficiency. The Dralethians had brought overwhelming force. The humans had brought math, and the math had won. Draltal's secondary heart thrummed faster, a primal drumbeat beneath his armored carapace. He had commanded fleets for decades. He had crushed rebellions, glassed worlds, bathed in the molten ruin of his enemies. But this was something else. This was elegance. The realization settled into his bones like a blade sliding home. Across the bridge, his crew watched him, their postures rigid, their optics dimmed in uncertainty. They were waiting for orders, for rage, for the old familiar script of vengeance. Draltal turned from the viewport. "Recall the fleet." The words landed like a hammer. Vashdor's spines flared. "High Commander, recall them." Draltal didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The command brooked no argument. The humans had not just defeated them, they had outplayed them. And worse, they had done it without firing a single shot. They didn't have to. That was the true horror, not the strength, but the restraint. The Dralethians had come to teach humanity a lesson. Instead, humanity had given them one, and as the molten vengeance powered down its weapons and began the long, silent retreat, Draltal found himself staring once more at the stars. They burned just as brightly as before, but nothing else would ever be the same. The molten vengeance hung in the void like a wounded beast, its once proud hull scorched and pitted from the engagement. The great forge, core at its heart, pulsed erratically, its usual molten rhythm disrupted by the damage it had sustained. The Dralethian armada, once a bristling wall of dark metal, and crimson plasma, now drifted in disarray. Some ships limping, others still processing the order to withdraw. Draltal stood motionless on the command deck, his claws flexing against the railing. The silence was worse than the battle, worse than the hum of weapons charging, worse than the screams of ruptured hulls. This was the silence of defeat, not the kind earned in honorable combat, but the kind that came from being outmaneuvered, outthought. Vashdor approached, his spines flickering in agitation. The scientist's optics darted between the tactical displays and his commander, as if searching for some hidden logic in the retreat. "High Commander," he began, voice low. "The humans." Draltal cut him off with a glance. There was nothing to say. The human ship, one ship, had not just survived their assault. It had controlled it. Every shot fired, every maneuver made, had been calculated, precise. The humans had known exactly how much force to use, no more, no less. And that was what unsettled him most. Dralethians waged war with fire and fury, with the certainty that overwhelming force would crush all resistance. But the humans, they had fought like surgeons, like accountants. And now, as the molten vengeance turned its battered hull toward home, something flickered on the long-range scanners. A single vessel. It was not the warship that had faced them before. This one was smaller, sleeker, a courier, perhaps. Unarmed, insignificant. And yet, as it transmitted its message, Draltal felt the weight of it like a blade pressed to his throat. Dralethian High Command. The human voice was calm, almost polite. Per the terms of engagement, you have incurred damages to sovereign human property. Attached is an itemized invoice for repairs, including labor, materials, and operational downtime. Payment is expected within 30 standard cycles. A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, late fees will apply. Vashdor made a sound like a crushed coolant line. They billed us? Draltal did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, on the scrolling list of charges, each one meticulously documented. War was one thing, but this was something far more terrifying. The humans did not just fight. They kept receipts. The silence on the Dralethian command deck was absolute. Draltal's claws flexed against the armrest of his command throne, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary heart pulsed erratically, a biological response he had not experienced since his first battle. The human courier ship hung in the void before them, its sleek, unassuming hull bathed in the molten glow of the Dralethian armada's energy signatures. It should have been insignificant, a speck, a mistake. The invoice scrolled across the main display, line after line of cold, clinical human script. Hull breach repairs, Fei credits, shield generator recalibration, Fei credits, lost cargo compensation, Fei credits. The numbers were precise, exacting, each one a calculated insult. Vashdor's spines twitched, his copper-plated fingers hovering over the tactical display as if afraid to touch it. This is absurd," he hissed, his voice a low, grating rasp. "They cannot possibly expect us to." Draltal cut him off with a single raised claw. His gaze never left the screen because it wasn't the numbers that unsettled him. It was the implication. The humans had not sent a warship. They had not issued threats. They had not even demanded surrender. They had sent an accountant, and that, more than any weapon, was what made his blood run cold. On the bridge of the Mercury's ledger, Major Victoria Harriman leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. The Dralethian armada sprawled across the view screen, dozens of angular fortress, like warships, their hulls gleaming like forged steel, their plasma cores pulsing with the dull, angry glow of a dying star. Any other species would have trembled, she smirked. "Transmission confirmed?" she asked. Her voice calm. Captain Richard Foster, standing at her shoulder, nodded, his cybernetic eye whirred faintly as it tracked the Dralethian fleet's movements. "I've received the invoice." No response yet. "Give them time," she murmured. "They're still processing the fact that we just turned a war into a business transaction." Foster exhaled sharply, the closest thing to a laugh he allowed himself in uniform. "Think they'll pay?" Harriman's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I hope not." Because the real message wasn't in the numbers. It was in the receipts. Every line item was proof. Proof that the humans had not just survived the Dralethian assault. They had recorded it, analyzed it, broken it down into quantifiable losses, and if they could do that, they could do far worse. Draltal's mandibles tightened. The human ship hadn't moved, hadn't powered weapons, hadn't even raised shields. It simply waited, as if this were nothing more than a routine billing dispute. That was the true horror. The Dralethians had waged war for millennia. They understood destruction. They reveled in conquest. This was something else entirely. "High Commander," Vashdor said, his voice strained. "Our scans confirm. The human vessel is unarmed. We could obliterate it with a single shot." Draltal's claws flexed again. But that was the trap, wasn't it? If they fired, they proved the humans right. Proved that the Dralethians were nothing more than mindless aggressors, incapable of reason. And if they didn't fire, they admitted fear. A low, grinding sound escaped his throat. The humans had not just outmaneuvered them, they had outplayed them, and the worst part, the invoice was still scrolling. "Late fees will apply." The silence on the Dralethian command deck was absolute, save for the faint, rhythmic pulsing of the molten core reactors deep within the ship's armored belly. The air shimmered with residual heat, the scent of scorched metal and ionized plasma thick enough to taste. Draltal's claws flexed against the armrest of his command throne, the dark alloy groaning under the pressure. His secondary eyelids flicked sideways, adjusting to the harsh orange glow of the tactical displays. The human ship, small, unassuming, unarmed, floated in the void before them, its hull reflecting the dull crimson light of the nearby star. It shouldn't have been a threat. Vashdor stood rigid beside him, his copper-scaled fingers twitching over the sensor console. The scientist had spent cycles dissecting human behavior, their technology, their psychology. He had assured the High Command that humanity was predictable, that they would either fight or flee, that they would break. This was neither. The human vessel hadn't so much as twitched since the armada had arrived. No weapons charged, no shields flared, no desperate transmissions begging for mercy, just waiting. And that damned invoice still scrolling across their screens. Draltal's mandibles ground together. He had faced fleets that outnumbered him 10-1. He had crushed rebellions, glassed worlds, shattered entire civilizations beneath the weight of Dralethian supremacy. This was insulting. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the deck as the Indomitable's engine cycled down further, as if the human ship were settling in for a long stay. Vashdor finally broke the silence. "High Commander," he said, his voice strained. "The human vessel is venting something." Draltal's spines flared. On the view screen, a thin, shimmering mist began to seep from the Indomitable's ventral hull, dispersing in lazy, glittering tendrils. The scanners flared to life, analyzing the composition, and then locked up entirely. Vashdor hissed, his claws retracting in alarm. It's water." Draltal's secondary eyelids snapped shut. Not plasma, not nanites, not some horrific human weapon, just water. The sheer absurdity of it struck him like a physical blow. The humans had faced down an entire Dralethian armada, and they were venting coolant. Not coolant. Vashdor's voice was barely a whisper. "They're laughing at us." Draltal's claws sank deeper into the armrest. Because the scientist was right, the humans weren't afraid. They weren't even trying. That was worse than any weapon. The invoice continued to scroll. Interest accrues daily. The Dralethian armada hung in the void like a storm of molten steel. their angular warships bristling with weapons, their engines glowing with the dull, pulsing heat of industrial plasma cores. Yet, for all their might, they were frozen. Not by fear, but by sheer, disbelieving fury. Draltal's claws had nearly split the command throne's armrests. His secondary eyelids flickered, a reflexive response to the absurdity unfolding before him. The Indomitable, that lone human monstrosity, was not just surviving, it was mocking them, venting water, a gesture so deliberately, insultingly mundane, that it bypassed all known Dralethian protocols for warfare. There was no logic to it, no tactical advantage, just a human thumbing its nose at the concept of a fair fight. Vashdor's voice crackled over the comms, the usual steadiness of his scientific tone frayed into something raw. They're not even powering weapons. Their railgun capacitors are at standby. Their plasma lances are cycling down. Draltal's spines flared, the copper filaments along his crest glowing hotter with each passing second. This wasn't a battle, this was a performance, and humanity had cast the Dralethians as the fools. Inside the Indomitable, Major Victoria Harriman leaned back in her command chair, fingers steepled. The holographic display before her painted the Dralethian fleet in seething orange, read their energy signatures pulsing like forge fires. She exhaled, slow and deliberate. They had expected a war. She had given them a receipt. Captain Richard Foster stood at her side, arms crossed, watching the same data scroll across his tactical feed. They're not moving. Harriman smirked. They're thinking. And that was the problem. The Dralethians were warriors, yes, but they were also engineers. Their entire civilization was built on brutalist efficiency, on the cold calculus of force versus resistance. They understood power, they respected it. This wasn't power, this was theater, and humans had always been better at that. Draltal's mind raced. The human ship was a fortress. Yes, but it was also a statement. Every system, every weapon, every inch of its armor had been designed not just to win, but to humiliate. They had let the Dralethians scan them. They had let them see the truth. And now, they were forcing the armada to make a choice. Attack, and prove humanity right, or retreat. And prove them smarter. Vashdor's voice, their last transmission, the one we dismissed as noise, it wasn't encrypted, it was open. Draltal's gaze snapped to him. The scientist's claws trembled as he pulled up the data. It's a ledger of every shot fired, every missile expended, every joule of energy wasted, and at the bottom, in crisp, unflinching human script, interest accrues daily. Draltal's blood ran cold, because now he understood this wasn't a battle, it was a transaction. And humanity had just presented the bill. The silence on the Iron Resolve's bridge was absolute. Draltal's claws dug into the command console, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of primal dread. The human ship, Indomitable. They had called it, hung in the void before them, its angular hull drinking in the light of distant stars. It wasn't just a warship. It was a ledger, a receipt, a mockery. Vashdor's voice was barely a whisper. They tracked it, every shot, every missile, every erg of wasted energy. Draltal's mandibles twitched. The Dralethian armada had fired thousands of rounds, missiles that had detonated harmlessly against the human ship's armor, plasma lances that had dissipated like mist against its shields. Even the Iron Resolve's primary forge, cannon, a weapon capable of melting continents, had barely scorched its hull. And the humans had counted it all. A flicker of movement on the tactical display. The Indomitable's railgun array shifted, not to fire, but to reposition. Like a merchant adjusting scales, Draltal's blood ran cold. They weren't just proving they could withstand the armada's assault. They were itemizing it. Aboard the Indomitable, Major Victoria Harriman watched the Dralethian fleet through the reinforced viewport. The alien ships were monstrous things, all jagged edges and molten cores. Their orange-red energy signatures, pulsing like forge fires, beautiful in their way, and utterly, hilariously outmatched. She tapped a command into her console. The ship's AI responded instantly, projecting a holographic tally above the command table. Numbers scrolled, ammunition expenditures, shield absorption rates, reactor drain, all of it cross-referenced with the Dralethian's own wasted firepower. Captain Foster leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "Think they'll get the message?" Harriman didn't smile. "They will. Because this wasn't just about firepower. It was about economics. The Dralethians had assumed humanity would fight like every other species, desperate, wasteful, burning through resources in a frenzy of destruction. But humanity had evolved. They had learned the oldest truth of war: the best victory is the one that costs your enemy everything, and you nothing. Draltal's mind raced. The human ship hadn't fired a single shot. Not one. It had simply stood there, weathering the storm, letting the Dralethians exhaust themselves against its hull. And now, with that damned ledger floating between them, the truth was undeniable. They couldn't win. Not because the humans were stronger, but because they were. Vashdor's claws trembled as he pulled up the final calculation. Their energy reserves, they've barely dipped, and ours. Draltal didn't need to hear the rest. The Armada's reactors were strained, their ammunition stores depleted, their crews exhausted, and the humans. They were fresh. A new transmission flickered across the comms. No encryption, no preamble, just 3 words, glowing in the harsh light of the bridge. Paid in full. Draltal's spines flattened against his back. This wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. And humanity had just taught them the cost of arrogance. The silence on the Dralethian command bridge was absolute. Draltal's claws flexed against the armrest of his throne, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary eyes, normally a flickering molten orange, had dimmed to a dull ember. Glow, the weight of realization pressed against his carapace, like the gravity of a dying star. They had fired everything. Plasma lances that could melt through battleplate, gravitic torpedoes designed to crumple dreadnoughts like tin, fusion barrages hot enough to ignite atmospheres, and the human ship, that sleek, unassuming monstrosity, had absorbed it all. Vashdor's voice was a rasp, his vocal sacs deflated with exhaustion. They're shielding. It isn't just dispersing energy, it's recycling it. His claws trembled over the holographic readouts, the numbers a damning indictment. Every shot we fired, every joule of heat, every ripple of kinetic force was harvested, stored, used. Draltal's spines twitched. The humans hadn't just built a warship. They had built a battery, a predator that fed on the violence of its enemies. A low, grinding hum vibrated through the deck as the human vessel designation UN's retribution finally moved, not with the jerky mechanical thrust of Dralethian drives, but with a smooth, liquid grace, as if space itself bent to accommodate it. Its hull, once matte black, now shimmered with a corona of stored energy, veins of blue, white light pulsing beneath the armor, like blood in a waking beast. Then the weapons activated, not all at once, not in some overwhelming salvo. A single railgun turret swiveled, its barrel humming with pent-up fury. A targeting laser flicked across the void, a polite warning, a receipt before the bill came due. The first shot tore through the Dralcon's shadow, Draltal's flagship, like a meteor through paper. No explosion, no fire, just a perfectly circular hole punched through 6 meters of reinforced battleplate, the edges glowing molten where the hypersonic round had vaporized on impact. Then the second turret aligned, the vein of the forge, a heavy cruiser, vanished in a flash of light, its reactor detonating as the human projectile shattered its core. The shockwave rattled the remaining fleet, sending smaller escorts tumbling like leaves in a storm. Draltal's mandibles clenched. This wasn't combat. This was accounting. Every shot they had fired, every jewel wasted, every insult, every demand, every sneering assumption, all of it, tallied in some cold human ledger. And now, the bill was being settled. A third turret locked on. Vashdor's voice was barely audible. They could have done this at any time. Draltal didn't answer. He didn't need to. The humans had let them exhaust themselves. Let them believe, for one glorious, arrogant moment, that they had the upper hand. And then, with the patience of a god, they had proven them wrong. The Retribution's engines flared, not to flee, but to advance. Draltal's blood ran cold. The lesson wasn't over. It had only just begun. The Retribution moved like a blade through smoke. Its engines, those impossible silent things, pulsed with a deep resonant hum that vibrated through the bones of every Dralethian, still alive to hear it. The ship didn't accelerate so much as it unfolded into motion, as if physics itself had bent to allow its passage. Draltal watched it come. The human vessel was scarred now. Its once pristine armor pitted and blackened from the Dralethian barrage. But the damage was superficial, a scratch, a mockery. The real horror lay beneath, in the way its weapon mount still cycled with mechanical precision, in the way its reactor signatures remained steady, unstrained, as if the last hour of combat had been nothing more than a warm-up. Vashdor's claws dug into the command console, his copper-plated fingers leaving grooves in the metal. "They let us hit them," he whispered. Draltal didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was written in the wreckage around them. The forge was gone, the ember's maw drifted, its molten core bleeding into the void. The sundered claw had lost propulsion, its engines reduced to slag by a single contemptuous shot, and the Retribution was still coming. Its forward railgun, the one that had cracked the forge like an egg, rotated with deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness. It wasn't just aiming, it was choosing. Draltal's mandibles flexed. He had commanded fleets for decades. He had crushed rebellions, glassed worlds, broken entire species beneath the weight of Dralethian industry. He had never once doubted his superiority. Now, for the first time in his life, he understood fear. Not the sharp, fleeting terror of battle, but the slow, creeping dread of realization. The kind that settled in the marrow and whispered, "You were never the hunter here." The Retribution fired. The projectile crossed the distance in a blink. No flare of energy, no warning, just the sudden, gut-wrenching impact as it punched through the sundered claw's remaining shields and buried itself in its bridge. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the claw detonated from within, its hull splitting apart in a bloom of orange, red fire. The same color as the molten steel that had birthed it. Silence filled the command deck. Vashdor's voice was hollow. They're not even using their primary weapons. Draltal exhaled. Of course they weren't. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration, a lesson in economy. The humans weren't wasting a single shot, a single joule of energy, a single gram of ammunition. They were dismantling the Dralethian fleet with the same methodical precision they might use to disassemble a faulty engine, and they were enjoying it. Draltal could see it in the way the Retribution moved. The slight, almost imperceptible adjustments in its trajectory. The way its secondary batteries tracked targets, but didn't fire. It was savoring this, drawing it out, making sure they understood. A proximity alert blared. The Retribution was closing, not to finish them. Not yet. Draltal's crest flattened against his skull as the comm channel crackled to life. No demands, no gloating, just a single calm human voice. Balance due. And then the guns fired again. The guns fired again, but not at the storm's maw. Draltal watched, his neural tendrils rigid with disbelief, as the Retribution's remaining batteries lanced out in perfect synchronization. Not toward his crippled flagship, not toward the handful of Dralethian vessels, still limping through the debris field, but toward the wreckage itself, precise surgical strikes. Molten beams carved through drifting hull fragments, reducing them to vapor before they could become navigational hazards. Railgun slugs intercepted spinning debris, shattering them into harmless dust. The humans weren't just destroying, they were cleaning. A final act of efficiency. The comm channel hissed again. The same voice, cool, unhurried, issuing coordinates. A jump point. A single word followed. Not a request. Not even an order. A permission. Draltal's claws flexed against his command console. This wasn't mercy. Mercy implied pity, and there was none in that voice. This was something colder, something far more terrifying. The humans had won. They knew they had won, and now they were ensuring the survivors carried the truth home. The storm's maw shuddered as its remaining engines flared to life, dragging the broken Leviathan toward the designated vector. Around them, the last functional Dralethian ships fell into formation, not in defiance, not even in unity, but in the dazed obedience of prey that had just glimpsed the apex predator's teeth. Draltal exhaled, mandibles clicking faintly. The lesson was simple, brutal, unmistakable. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to teach, and the galaxy would remember.